I think we can start to the meeting, and in the meantime, other friends also can join. Maybe Ece, can you share the TAİDER rules, FBN rules with us, please? Very good, it's coming on the way. Okay. So as usual, as the tradition, we start with our FBN rules. As trust and openness, participation, confidentiality, respect and professionalism, non-solicitation, and appropriate behavior are our company rules as always. Thank you, Ece. And secondly, let me introduce myself. I'm Neşe Gök. I'm president of İnci Holding. I'm the third generation of our family business located in Turkey, Izmir. So if you happen to come around to Izmir, please let me know and say hi. And what are we doing here? Why are we here? We are at the third session of our VC Crash Course series. And we, as the FBN Turkey TAİDER Innovation and Entrepreneurship Committee, we organized this series of VC Crash Courses to share our knowledge, not only our knowledge, but also 500 startup knowledge with the interested FBN members. And what does our committee do? Actually, we established this committee to give information, to be the information ambassador about our concepts and include entrepreneurship and provide development for the members of FBN. We want to offer our stakeholders the opportunity to share our experience of entrepreneurship and innovation. We enable members to establish a communication network with our stakeholders in the entrepreneurship ecosystem that may be beneficial for all of us. And we want to help members develop a culture of entrepreneurship within their businesses. So if in your countries, if you are interested, or if you are already a member of this entrepreneurship committee, please always share what you are doing, and if we can help in any way to share our knowledge about it, we are happy to share always. And in this VC Crash Course series, this is the third session, and what we did in the first session was we Kaan from 500 startups told us about investment ecosystem, the key players, what are they, who are they, the key definitions. We learned a lot about from him. And in the second session, which was last week, and we covered with Enis how to pick investments, which was, I think, very inspiring. We talked about what are the key elements while we are picking the investments. Enis talked about the founder, talked about lots of things about founder, what they are looking in the founders, and what are the key due diligence issues that they are looking, the uniqueness, the awareness of founders, the ability of the founders to pivot many times with patience. And we talked about the good old red ocean, blue ocean thing, and how does it affect our decisions in investments, and the retention and engagement of the founders, the stickiness in social mobile companies. We talked about e-commerce analysis, complexity of the marketplace, hardware, software issues, and exit opportunities. And also we talked about what we are looking in the founders and what founders should look in the VC side. So we covered, I think, a huge part of this world in the last two sessions. And today we will talk about the net term sheet. It is very technical part of it, very critical part of the process. And Kaan will talk us about the navigation of term sheets, how we will do this, how we will do the sign thing, and what are we going to look in those things. And in the meantime, at about 6 o'clock, Beji from San Francisco will join us, and we can ask, I think, in many aspects about many questions. She's the managing director in the 500 startups. So it will be a very valuable session, this also. And so I think I can give the word to Kaan, right? Anything I didn't cover?
Yeah, I think you only missed Vijay's participation on the first session.
Yes,
yeah, one of the global heads of 500 who talked a bit about, global corporate venture capital efforts that are done on our end, and what are some of the, key challenges and some advantages of setting up those establishments. And I think Beji can have some views on that as well. So if you have any follow-up questions to those, you can ask Beji to provide that from a global perspective. Since we're a regional early stage fund, sometimes our perspective is limited to the region and on the early stage. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to, either during the call or after the call, direct them to us so that we can reply to them. With that, thank you so much,
Yes. And Kaan, if
yes,
there are any questions, please feel free to, join. We are not so crowded here, so we can do a discussion. But if you do not want to disturb and write the question down to the chat, you can write that. We will be following those questions also.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. It's lovely to see. By the way, first of all, thank you so much for joining and giving time to this early stage VC crash series. We're on the final session. So thank you so much for bearing with us, and it's especially delightful for us to see returning and familiar faces. Just adds to our excitement on giving this, to show that people are happy and coming back to basically finish this up. So today I'll be talking about, as Nesha kindly made the intro, I'll be talking about navigating term sheets on the early stage and some venture financing types on the seed stage. Term sheets specifically relate to equity financing rounds. Basically, it's a simple document for parties to agree on the key terms before drawing up those, heavy share purchase or shareholders agreements after agreeing on some of those key economic and control terms that you may have. But also on the early stage, and since some of you may end up doing angel investments and some other early stage investments, the convertible note, the convertible security note, either SAFE or KISS or convertible equity note, whatever, especially if you're investing in the US or in some countries such as Estonia, which makes this possible, you will see these SAFE or convertible notes being used as term sheets. That's why we will treat two types of venture financings on the early stage. One of them will be the convertible securities, and we will touch upon the key points there, and I will give you some tips on how to make that happen. And we will also finally touch upon the priced equity rounds, where the process will start with a term sheet, where the parties will need to agree on key terms, and then translate that into many separate documents, such as share purchase agreements, shareholders agreement, side letters, schedules, management agreement, etc. So with that, if you'll allow me, I'll present my presentation. So today, as I said, I'm really excited to talk to you about legal terms for venture financing. And by the end of this crash course, hopefully you'll understand common early stage VC financing structures. As I said, one of them being the convertible notes, and the other the priced equity rounds, also known as preferred stock rounds. So we will also touch upon what are some of the key terms of the term sheets, the priced equity rounds, and also the convertible rounds, also known as SAFE, convertible equity rounds. So you may ask why you may end up needing this. Like many of us investors, you will most likely find yourself having to negotiate initial terms with a startup, most likely on a convertible note or on a term sheet, without having a legal counsel by your side. So in that case, just to avoid making some of the common mistakes that early stage VCs do by not paying attention too much into some of these clauses, or by not asking for some additional clauses that will along the line protect the early stage investor, you may end up leaving a lot of value on the table if some things goes bad, basically. So as I said, I will start by introducing the two types of typical venture financing deals. So there are deals made on convertible securities or on preferred stock, the main difference being between the two documents. The first one gives the holder a right or basically a date at which, or an event at which their investment, the amount of money that's given to the company to convert into equity at a given time or an event which need to be defined in the document. Whereas on a preferred stock equity transaction, these documents will be much heavier, and there will be a share purchase agreement where the investor will directly buy and own and will get the shares of the company, and the transaction will occur at that point in time. So you may ask, why would anyone need these convertible security notes? Because in most cases, at early stage startups, it is basically impossible in some cases to agree on a valuation. That's why with convertible securities, you can basically postpone that valuation discussion to Series A, to a future price round where the valuation will be set, and you will have some sort of a discount or a valuation cap, which will account for the early stage risk that you've taken on by investing at this convertible at the earlier stage than the price round, which will be later down the line, as we've discussed in the first session. So I will start by going into the details of convertible securities first, because on the early stage in the US, that's how most of the deals were being done. And since we're an early stage VC and our preference is to do convertible security notes, and as Enis talked about being founder first and giving flexibility to the founder in the last session, we prefer to do deals with convertible securities, especially in the markets where this may be possible, purely due to the fact that we want to get as little rights as possible at the early stage as early stage investors, because those rights will be important for the company along the way. And also the first determinant or the most important thing for an early stage startup is to get that funding as early on as possible, as opposed to negotiating those terms with investors that will prolong the closing, adding some other precedent to that closing, making the whole thing harder to consummate, and the money will eventually come into the company at a later date due to all of these technicalities. And at the end of the day, the startup will end up losing a few months of basic operations that they could otherwise have if they had done the deal on a convertible security. So there are two types of convertible securities. The first one being convertible debt, and the second one is convertible equity. Again, if we were to pick one of them, we would pick convertible equity, also known as a safe note, because the convertible equity is not a debt instrument which creates some sort of a liability for the startup. Rather, it's an equity instrument with no maturity date, and basically there's no price per share as well, which will help companies put together these rounds much more easily. So basically, starting out, looking at convertible securities, again, you may ask why people prefer this. Well, there are a couple of reasons for this. I think the main one being on convertible securities, there are no fixed valuation of the company. So since there's no share transfer happening at that point in time, and the share transfer will happen in the future, where a priced equity round happens and where the shares will be priced at that round, the transaction will happen there. And all of this agreement will refer to that future price round where the valuation will be set. And today we will make the transaction utilizing just a 5-6 page simple document. So the first reason for us preferring convertible securities as opposed to priced equity round, when looking at a very early stage company with no revenues, no assets, etc., is the difficulty of agreeing on a valuation and negotiating a valuation today. So as I said, convertible securities can also be treated as term sheets on the early stage, because most often, like practically, you will see startups that are going on to fundraise and talking to investors with a SAFE document. They will have their own version of that convertible security document, and they will, in many cases, send that to the investor, and will try to agree on that piece of document and sign that document and get the money. So again, going back to some of the properties of convertible securities, they are mainly used by early stage companies due to the fact that it's really hard to value some of these companies. So at the document, there is no fixed valuation. There's no price per share. So that makes the negotiations a bit easier compared to negotiating on the price. And at its bare bones structure, basically a convertible equity document will grant no additional rights to the investor, other than basically guaranteeing that at the conversion, the early stage convertible security investor will gain the same amount of seniority, the same class of shares as the priced equity lead investor. So that's the only simple term that's being set by the SAFE agreement, as opposed to the priced equity round that has some other additional terms to it, many additional terms to it, basically. So from that perspective, since there are very less terms to agree on, it's much easier to consummate an earlier stage transaction with a convertible security. So as I said, in many cases with convertible securities, term sheets are not often used, but rather the SAFE document, the document itself, is used as a term sheet, since it's a very simple 5-6 page document which lays out some specific terms. And since there are very little terms, there is little due diligence requirements as well. That's why deals are completed quickly with these agreements, and often on a rolling basis. So what that means is a founder may sign a SAFE agreement with you, and then can go on and market that same agreement to another investor 1 week later, for example, to raise additional $50,000, for example. So they can fundraise for 3 months using the same document and on the same terms, just to come up to that total fundraising goal of 500,000, for example. But on price deals, since you need to execute shareholders agreement every single time with every new additional investor that will be coming on board, you need to do these deals on a much more structured and on a group basis. So I think this is also very important for founders and investors alike, that on the early stage, if we can give the flexibility to the founders to raise on convertible notes, it'll be much faster for them to basically onboard additional investors to go to that funding goal that they've had when they started out. So the two most important terms for convertible securities are the methods with which the calculation of the conversion into equity will happen. I'm sure many of you that's doing angel deals or early stage deals, especially in the US, are familiar with some of these convertible structures, and that's why we will go through some examples where we will show what happens to 100K invested in a SAFE that had a valuation cap, and on another example we will look at what happens to that 100K on a SAFE that's been done with a discount method. So what this tells us is basically, if you sign the SAFE with a discount, that means on the priced equity round, so if the company ends up raising their Series A, the priced equity round 1 year down the line at 10 million valuation, and if you're SAFE, if your convertible security agreement had a 10% discount, then you will convert your shares at 9 million valuation as opposed to 10 million. So I think that's really important to understand, and I think we will go through some examples to really carry that message home. So there are two types of convertible securities. One of them, the convertible equity, the most popular one, the SAFE, also known as, and the other one is convertible debt, also known as convertible notes. So up until a point, convertible debt was the only type of security people would use up until SAFEs got popular by YC, and the SAFE is an acronym for Sample Agreement for Future Equity. So basically, this is a draft agreement that's been put together by YC as they were doing these convertible equity deals for their own portfolio companies. They wanted to basically open source that agreement, and people can go to YC's page and download these agreements and basically use them as they see fit. But in opposition to that, convertible debt is a very established instrument that's being used in later stage companies as well. Basically, as a debt instrument that, in case of non-payment at the end of the maturity period, the amount will convert into shares at the end of the day. So people still invest in convertible debt notes, but that's not really common today, especially in the US, because there are some drawbacks to it. First of all, convertible debt is in the form of a promissory note document, which constitutes it as a debt instrument legally under the US law. So that promissory note needs to be repaid or converted to equity at the trigger event or at the maturity date. So since this is a debt instrument, there needs to be an interest rate proportion to it as well. So that also creates some other problems in terms of setting that and agreeing on that interest rate, and setting that interest rate and agreeing on a maturity date. And as an investor, you always need to look out for when that maturity date is, because if you're investing in a startup through a convertible debt note, you never really want to get repaid for a nominal amount of interest, right? You want your shares to convert into equity and then participate in the upside of a high growth startup. So this is never a debt instrument, but it's structured in a way that it will somehow convert into equity at some future point in time. But since this is a debt note, I think if you're ever come across a convertible debt note, I think you really need to ask the founder why they are going for a debt note, because in many cases there may be some drawbacks to it. Again, summarizing, one of them being agreeing on an interest rate and on a maturity date that you need to keep track of. And the maturity date presents all sorts of problems. Say you executed a convertible note with a maturity date in 2 years. And if the company cannot raise their Series A, their prize round within that 2-year time frame, then you'll need to extend that maturity date. Because if not, your shares may be converted, or the debt need to be repaid, and the company may opt to repay that debt as opposed to giving you that shareholding in the company. So it's really important to agree on these points and pay attention to these points, in my opinion. And other than that, since convertible debt notes are debt instruments, they will show up as liabilities on a startup's balance sheet, which may, for example, under Delaware statutory law, if a startup has no assets, no revenues, and just debt, just convertible debt notes on its balance sheet, then it'll look like it's technically a bankrupt company. It will put them into this technical insolvency position, which will limit their flexibility in terms of making some strategic capital decisions, such as share buybacks. They won't be able to do any share buybacks because of being in this technical insolvency position from a regulatory legal perspective. That's why they may have some problems along the way. That's why founders may not want to do convertible debt notes as opposed to convertible equity notes, which we will come to in a bit. So another point to emphasize with convertible debt notes is these notes are unsecured, meaning that investors that provide these loans may look for these loans to be backed by some sort of a collateral, but there won't be any collateral as the standard terms suggest. So I think a very important point, if you were to somehow come across a convertible debt note, is to clarify what happens to that debt note in an event of acquisition. Because in many cases, since this instrument is accounted for as a liability on the balance sheet of the company, pre-conversion, so before your shares convert into equity, if an acquirer comes and acquires the startup that you've signed this convertible debt note with, then the acquirer may want to pay all of the debts of the startup, and you may end up getting just the nominal return of your interest and the amount repaid. So your initial goal was to invest in the startup and participate in its upside for the next 10 years by having this simple agreement that will convert into equity in a future point in time. But before the maturity, if the company gets acquired by another buyer and that coming acquirer ends up paying all of the debts of the company, in the absence of the specific clauses that protect you for such an event, you will basically be left on the left with just the nominal interest rate return, basically something like 8 to 10% return for your money. But you had something very different, much different on your mind when you had this from a return perspective when you first seen this. So again, very important to clarify some of those points if you ever come across a convertible debt note. So from convertible debt was born convertible equity, if you will. So what they did was the biggest issues with the convertible debt notes was the interest rate component of it. So the need to negotiate a nominal interest rate return and the maturity date, which you needed to keep an eye on. So with convertible equity notes that are doable in the US and in Estonia, and there are some examples of it in some key jurisdictions such as the UK, there is no maturity dates and there is no interest rate. There's only provisions that dictate in its, again, bare bone form, provisions to dictate some simple, early exit provisions, some dissolution provisions, and basically the valuation at which the conversion will happen into equity. So with convertible equity notes, the most popular of them is the SAFE, as I mentioned, the Simple Agreement for Future Equity, developed by YC. And KISS is another template that you can use that was developed by 500 startups as a competing draft of these documents. Again, the most important functions of it is that...
Kaan, what does KISS stand for?
I actually have no idea. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, exactly. We can ask Beji. That's a good question. Really, I have no idea. And since we use safes, that's why never bothered to ask. All right. So going back to convertible equity notes, the two most important provisions of it is there's no specific repayment date. That's why, as an investor or as a founder, you don't need to go search for the agreement and look for that maturity date. And also gets rid of some of the issues that we talked about when we looked at convertible debt notes. So again, convertible equity notes converts to shares at next priced financing round. So at the next priced equity round that the company will do, there is no maturity date required generally. So that creates basically an advantage of no need to extending or amending some of these agreements along the way. And since these convertible equity notes aren't classified as debt instruments under Delaware statutory law, they don't create any solvency issues. And at the end of the day, they do not have an interest rate, so there are less negotiation burden on all parties. So in its very simple form, as I said, the SAFE is a very simple document, 5-6 pages. Actually, I can go to YC's website and show you that very fast. Just a second. I will go through some term sheet examples as well. So this is the page, ycombinator.com/documents, where you can find these template agreements. I can write this into the chat as well, so you can take a look for yourself. So there are different types of SAFE agreements, which we will go into detail. Some with valuation cap with no discount, some with discount, no valuation cap, etc. And this is the main bare bone format of the SAFE. I'll try to open that up very fast as well. So here you're seeing the Word document, right? Currently, yes. So here you'll see that there's only be a valuation cap, which dictates the maximum amount of valuation that your shares will convert at, or in another version of this document, this may have been a discount to priced equity round. So as I said, there are two key terms, either a valuation cap on a SAFE or a discount to the next priced equity round. So here in this example, so this is a valuation cap only example. That's why there will be a cap of valuation, and we will go through examples to basically illustrate this. So don't worry about it if you're feeling lost. And other than that, there's only provisions that basically makes sure that I, as a SAFE investor, will get the same class of shares, same amount of privileged shares as the next investor that will be coming later down the line on the priced equity round. So these provisions are only making sure that I'm getting the same class of shares. And on top of that, there are very simple representations and warranties that the company and the investor make to each party. So this is the company representations, very simple, very boilerplate, simple terms, and then the investor representation. So in total, this is a 6-page document that basically only sets the maximum amount of valuation that this investment will turn into equity. So we will go through examples. Please bear with me there. I'm going back to the slide. Yes. So as I said, in its simplest form, the SAFE only sets the valuation cap or a discount and makes sure that I, as a SAFE investor, will get the same rights, same class of shares as the priced equity investor that will be coming later down the line. So this is important to make sure that I'm getting the same claim on the cash flows as the same class of shareholder. Having that same seniority on that equity claim, basically. But on top of that, on top of the SAFE, if you want to get additional rights, such as pro rata, most favored nation, information rights from the company, then you can also put together a side letter that will reference itself to the SAFE to basically get those rights from the founder early on with a SAFE. So what this does is, without going into the burden and legal cost of executing a priced equity round and going through that long process that will take at least 3 to 6 months, you can do a very simple SAFE agreement in like a week, and then put together the side letter, which will grant you some additional rights that will protect you as an early stage investor. And basically, I try to put down the rights that we try to go for when we try to do a SAFE agreement and then execute an additional side letter, which will grant us these notes. So with that, I want to go back to the YC site and show you that on YC, so there are side letters as well. So they give you a pro rata side letter draft, which you can execute in unison with the SAFE agreement to make sure that you have that pro rata right, basically a right to protect your shareholding in future rounds of financing. So YC is also aware of the fact that SAFE agreements in its simplest form misses some of the points, some of the investor demands that there may be. That's why they put together these drafts of side letters that need to be signed in unison with the original agreement to basically get those rights. So if you're looking at a SAFE agreement, please make sure to ask the person in front of you if you have any additional rights on top of the specific SAFE. And if you don't, you may need to execute a side letter which will grant you some of these rights. So what we ask from the founders are the following. We generally ask for most favored nation clause, which basically makes sure that if the founder, say like 2 weeks down the line, once you execute this, 2 years later, 2 weeks later, the founder may go and do a better deal with another investor. Say you invested a $10 million valuation cap in a SAFE, and then 2 weeks later, they end up signing another SAFE with a new investor that at like $5 million valuation cap, so a lower valuation cap. So they end up giving a better deal to another investor. So if you have this most favored nation clause, what this means is the founder needs to give you the same deal that they've given to other investors at better terms. So as a lead early stage investor, we tend to really push for this most favored nation clause because we want to make sure that since we were the lead investor into this company in the early stage, the founder doesn't go around and cuts a better deal for another investor and basically us getting a worse deal along the way. So it's very important to include this one. And if you look at YC's website, you'll see that YC also has a template which has most favored nation clause as a general provision in the exact SAFE agreement. So other than that, we like to get pro rata rights. These may be negotiated with the founder as well. So the founder may say that, so pro rata is the right to basically protect your shareholding in the company in future rounds. So say in this early stage seed round, you ended up getting as the VC fund 5% shareholding. And in the next Series A round, you will need to put up more money to basically protect that 5% shareholding, right? Since the company will increase its capital and there will be funds that go into the company. In order to not get diluted, you will need to put additional funds, and this pro rata rights basically guarantees your allocation in future rounds of financing. But in very successful startups along the way, the startups will come to you as the early stage investor and they will say that, okay, we will need to cancel your pro rata rights because if we don't, then I have no room for new investors. And they will start, coming to your door and asking for you to basically leave some of these rights just to be able to give them more flexibility on onboarding new investors, which will take the company to the next stage or which may provide more support along the way. So even today, there are some founders, early stage founders, that are very reluctant to give some of these pro rata rights to companies, or at least put a cap on them. Say like you can only do pro rata up until Series B, for example, just to be able to control their cap tables as they wish. So there may be some negotiation points here. And another right that we like. Yes.
What should be our approach when a startup comes like that? Because this is a two side of the coin. When, for instance, the startup, let me say, sits in front of Sequoia and Sequoia sees that, well, there are lots of angel investors and VC and they have pro rata rights, most favored nation rights, information rights, anti-dilution rights, and would they be, wishing to invest in this company? That would decrease our shares value if they don't. On the other side, if they ask, okay, you have pro rata right, but can we negotiate it? What should be our approach about it?
Well, I think it's less of a problem for angel investors. It's more of a problem for early stage VCs like us, because and like for some like us that have the additional follow-on capability, right? So if you don't have the funds, then you won't be able to put up your pro rata, and that won't be a problem along the way. But if you have the funds to participate in future rounds, say up to like Series C, then that may become a problem. And at that point, I think that becomes a discussion to be had on a case-by-case basis with the founder, because if you want to have obviously, if they're talking to Sequoia, then you want to have Sequoia on the cap table, right? From an exit perspective. So you may want to, do a deal with the founder just to make Sequoia happy. For example, from our portfolio, a case in point had happened, and the investor was Sequoia. They wanted to get this ticket of, say, I'm just, coming up with a number right now, like $10 million to achieve the ownership target that they wanted. But in order to do that, we needed to scrap our pro rata. So after long discussions, we were basically convinced by the founder that this will be better for the ultimate outcome, and we could see that. That's why we basically made a deal to scrap that and made that happen. But in another case, as you said, there may be another arrangement, and someone may come in and buy you out if you have a, if you have somewhere else to plug that money in. But then again, like even today, like I see with like pre-seed seed companies trying to cap our pro ratas at Series A, for example, because founders have become, some founders are very, very strong, and they may push for that. And again, just to give them that flexibility, I think at the end of the day, if I was to pick one as Kaan Eren, I would pick to be founder friendly and at least try to agree on Series B or something like that. But with other rights, same. I think once a company matures, the amount of value that an early stage VC can bring decreases. This is just fact of the matter, like, because the amounts of funding will change, and you will have these pre-IPO investors which will start helping the company prepare for an IPO, and at that point the operational support that you bring to the table will be very limited, and the founder will be like, okay, you need to give me some room on the cap table and on the rights so that I can make my later stage investors happy. That will help me consummate the exit. So from my perspective, for early stage investors, we're the king in the early stage, like for the next 2-3 years, as we provide the most value, both in terms of funding and value add support, connections, etc. But as the company matures and goes towards that IPO route, then I think later stage investors need to have more rights, and they need to feel secure, because they are the ones that will be taking this company to the next level. But again, that's a great question, and it's really hard to decide on these things, and sometimes it just comes to fighting. And at the end of the day, whoever wins that fight will have that right, basically.
And Kaan, there is another question about this convertible and safe
Yes.
agreements. Anything related to dispute resolution or arbitration in these agreements, or just?
I don't want to lie, so I will need to go and check. I mean, definitely. So there isn't a specific court of arbitration that the agreement points you to. But if you're executing a safe in the US, then you go through the Delaware legal or wherever the company may be, their legal requirements. So no, like specifically, there is no legal dispute regulation provision, but it's generally covered.
Yeah, I think this safe agreement thing differs country to country. It is very common in US, but in Turkey it's not very common, and in many countries that we represent, I think here
Yes.
it might not be so common also. So each country should check the.
That's why we actually put together as 500 Istanbul, because we see that happening a lot across Turkey and CEE. Typically, like every VC that we know from the region, the best ones, the large ones, small ones, etc. Whenever they do deals in the US, and a lot of VCs from the region are like us, that they can do diaspora deals. Basically, they can invest in founders from this region, but in the US. And as you know, like some of the better founders want to establish their companies in the US or Estonia just to be able to execute these safe documents. And whenever that happens, then I see that the regional VCs are happy to do convertible equity deals. But in Turkey, since you mentioned that those technical difficulties in executing some of the convertible equity notes, because they need a triggering event, it's costly to do, there's a maturity date, so it's very technically challenging, and it basically goes against the nature of the simplicity of the agreement. You end up doing a lot of negotiations just to agree on a simple note, and it basically turns into the same thing as a price, share purchase agreement. So that's why we put together a very simple term sheet for a priced equity round in Turkey, at least, with our Turkish legal counsel. So I will go through the terms of that document as well, and I will share that document with you because we made it public. So you can take a look at, we basically converted the SAFE document into a priced equity round on a very, light terms and founder-friendly manner. So going back to the rights that we asked for, we've talked about the pro rata rights, and then we asked for information rights, because in the absence of that, the company has no liability to us investors to provide any sort of information. And then we may also ask for an anti-dilution right, which basically guarantees that if the company goes through a down round, we don't get diluted and we get additional shares. Down round meaning if they end up raising at a lower valuation compared to the SAFE that we've executed. And then in some cases, we may push for a tag-along right, which means that as an investor, as a minority investor, in an event where a majority investor, in this case, the founder, decides on selling his majority shares, then I can tag along to him. Basically, I can sell at the same terms and price and to the same person by utilizing this option and selling with him at the same time. So I'm asking for this right because I don't want to get stuck in the company and will want to exit if the founder is exiting, because he's the person that I built my conviction on, and he or she is the person that I've invested in at the end of the day. So with that, just to sum it up, in its bare bones form, in its purest format that you can find on the top of the list on Y Combinator's website, the three most important terms of a convertible security SAFE agreement is either discount or the valuation cap that dictates the price per share at which your investment will convert into equity at a future price round. So the discount is the percentage discount applied to the preferred stock share price when the convertible security converts to equity in the price round that will happen later down the line. So in the US, this discount ranges from 10% to 30%, which is the most common range. And or you may have a valuation cap on the SAFE document, which basically dictates the maximum pre-money or post-money. In this example, I use pre-money valuation, but in your document, it may be post-money valuation. The maximum pre-money valuation amount to be used to calculate the preferred stock share price for the conversion of the convertible security into an equity. So this is not a valuation of the company at the time of the investment, but rather a cap that you agree with the founder that will convert your shares into equity, basically. And then one other important point on a SAFE agreement is the capitalization, which is the amount of company shares issued and outstanding. This is a key piece in calculating the ultimate conversion price, and we will go through examples now, so it will be much clearer in a second. And a tip to investors here, please make clear that those share capital calculations include the option pool increases, the warrants, or any other convertibles that this company may have issued to other investors, so that you don't really calculate your conversion price mistakenly and end up making a wrong calculation at the end of the day. So say that we have a SAFE, we invested $200,000 on a KISS or a SAFE into this fictional company called Acme Incorporated. So they gave out the SAFE with a $5 million valuation cap or a 20% discount. So we went through a SAFE example, which had a valuation cap only, and there may be another SAFE with a discount only, and there may be others that have both of them, either or of them. So in this case, the SAFE that we've signed is into this company called Acme Incorporated. We've invested $200,000, and the SAFE will convert into equity at a future price round at either a $5 million valuation cap or a 20% discount to the valuation agreed at the Series A provided by the lead investors. So in this case, Acme Incorporated's founders went on to raise their Series A and got a term sheet from a potential lead investor, which set the pre-money valuation at $4 million. So what that means is the Series A valuation set by the lead investor is lower than the valuation cap of the SAFE, which was $5 million. In this case, we end up using the discount because the pre-money valuation was lower than your cap. So you end up using the discount, and you will end up getting more shares as opposed to doing the deal at a 5 million valuation cap. So in this example, we've assumed that the company has 2 million shares outstanding, and we calculate the Series A price per share as 4 million pre-money valuation divided by 2 million at $2 per share. So that's the price set by the Series A investor. So let's calculate the amount of shares that I will convert into at the consummation of this transaction. And that will be, since I have a 20% discount and we found the price per share to be $2, I will multiply those $2 with 0.8 to reflect the discount. And my price per share will be 1.6 as opposed to $2, which was the Series A investors entry valuation. So I end up getting for my 200,000 that I've invested into the SAFE, I will end up getting 125,000 shares, Series A shares from the company. And since the company has like 2 million something shares, that will come down to like 6% or something in shareholding. So let's say this term sheet came at a higher valuation. So say that the valuation came in at 8 million. So this is the next example. Again, the same company. We're investing $200,000 into this company called Acme Incorporated. Yes, we're investing in a SAFE, $200,000 into Acme Incorporated. The terms of the SAFE is the same. Again, you can see it here, 5 million valuation cap or a 20% discount. And let's assume this time that the Series A term sheet came in at $8 million of pre-money valuation as opposed to 4 million. So in this case, this 8 million pre-money valuation is higher than your valuation cap. That's why this discount is scrapped and you go with a $5 million valuation cap when you're calculating your ultimate amount of shareholding. And again, the example, the assumptions are the same. So the company has 2 million shares outstanding, and divide that 8 million to 2 million. There's a typo here. You get $4 price per share, which is 2 times higher than the previous example, as the valuation is 2 times higher than the previous example. So in this case, what will be my conversion valuation? It will be this 5 million valuation cap that we set as the signee of the SAFE agreement that we did previously to this Series A agreement, and in which case our price per share will be $2.5 per share, and divide that by the $200,000 that you've invested earlier will get you to 80,000 Series A shares in the company, which will lead to a 40% discount. And from an ownership perspective, that will translate into like something close to 3 to 4%, I think. So a couple takeaways here. It's really important to understand and basically go through scenarios when you're deciding on if you want to get a valuation cap or a discount or both of them, or you need to go through these scenarios and make these calculations to basically understand what will be the amount of shareholding that you will get later down the line once the company receives this Series A term sheet. So with that, I will conclude on convertible security agreements and move to preferred stock financings, and then go through that example that I mentioned of a term sheet that we put together to make it as friendly as possible, as founder friendly as possible, and basically the translation of a safe agreement into a simple priced equity round. So as I said, preferred stock financings are the most conventional forms of, share purchase agreements. I'm sure you all have done some sort of a or executed some sort of a shareholders agreement, at least for your own family company, and you had to go through that document dictating some of the key rights of some of the parties, and dictating the share classes, some other key rights, board matters, reserved matters, etc. So as I said in the beginning, these documents are much more costly to start out with, to put together, and also take a longer time to negotiate, especially if there are more than one or two parties that are trying to negotiate the deals. Because say, like in an example, especially out of Turkey, you have very different types of early stage VC funds. Some of them can only invest in Turkey, for example, in Turkish domiciled companies, Turkish entities. So that basically creates problems for us as a global VC with global ambitions. So we may want our company to transfer its headquarters to the US, for example, one day, if they're successful. But that other investor may not want that, because their mandate is to invest in companies headquartered in Turkey, for example, because of their investors' requirements. So in that case, it'll be really hard for me to negotiate an SHA with that person, basically putting that as a reserved matter, something trying to get a veto right for himself. So in that case, it'll be really hard for us to negotiate, and it will take a very long time to negotiate some of these agreements. This is just an example, but there are many cases such as this one. And the other part of the equation, I think, these preferred stock financing deals are never, done with two documents only. You may have, lots of additional documents that need to be signed by all of the parties, need to be reviewed and executed at the end of the day, negotiated. There may need to be a need for an amended certificate of incorporation. The company may need to change some of its internal bylaws. You may need to create, 50 or 100 pages long share purchase agreements trying to dictate the economic terms, and then maybe even a longer document of an SHA agreement, shareholders' rights agreement, basically trying to come up with a board structure, some veto rights, etc. And then you may have many other additional documents on the side. Some of the examples that I could come up with were right of first refusal agreements, which gives the right to basically, which gives the existing investors a call option to acquire the shares of another shareholder in the company in case they go out and try to sell those shares in the open market. Other than that, there may be a voting agreement and side letters, a couple of them with additional rights granted to either of the parties that may not fit the shareholders agreement, basically. So going into some of the boilerplate-ish terms of the document, there are reps and warranties. So representation and warranties that either the company or the founder or the investor will need to give their counterparts. But as opposed to the SAFE, which has a very light and general reps and warranties terms, in a preferred stock financing, as the investor may ask for additional reps and warranties from the founder as they do their due diligence, then the founder really needs to start thinking really hard on some of these issues and may want to protect himself on a very high level, and this may prolong some of these discussions. So I think, especially on the very early stage, it really makes sense to keep reps and warranties as simple as possible, and not really try to make the founder personally liable with some of these representations and warranties, just to not discourage them from risk taking. Because as we touched upon on previous sessions, on the early stage, it's all about risk appetite and taking risks and flexibly trying new stuff and pivoting to new areas. That's why you really don't want to discourage your founder, the early stage founder, from feeling that burden of liability and trying to cover some of his exposures that he or she may have. So other provisions are, right of first refusal, tag along and drag along rights, anti-dilution rights, control and voting rights, liquidation and dividend preferences. So and looking at it, the general practice is to get warranties from the founders as well as the company in priced stock financing rounds. Generally on safe agreements, you only end up getting warranties from the company as opposed to the founder. And there's another provision that there are some other provisions to include an anti-dilution protection, which may be a lot harsher than a safe document. And then I think the main point of negotiation and pain comes with the veto rights. So especially in Turkey and CEE, some investors want to be very much in control of the startups that they invest in. And they try to get, in my opinion, very exorbitant veto rights, such as management hires. So the founder is trying to hire a chief of staff, for example. Then some of the investors end up asking for, veto rights on key hires, which may end up blocking a founder from making a hire, or may create lots of, bureaucracies or technical, logistical burden on both the founder and the investor to go through these, veto rights. So I think this is one of the main reasons that founders tend to go for safe notes, want to prefer safe notes as opposed to preferred stock financing, because safe notes don't really open the door for these for additional veto rights. And then
Kaan, sorry to interrupt. Could you just elaborate on anti-dilution protection? I assume it's very different than pro rata rights.
Yes. It's very different in that anti-dilution rights basically protect the investor from their investment losing value potentially. So say you invested in a safe that basically set the valuation cap at $10 million, and then the founder ended up raising 6 months down the line at like $8 million, for example. So with the most favored nation clause, you may cover that, you may get that additional safe, but with the anti-dilution provision, the company needs to, at the time of conversion, once there is capital raise, needs to issue additional shares that will basically prevent that dilution from happening if a down round happens. So,
so the investor still, keeps their share at a constant value unless there is an upfront, right?
Exactly.
Just to clarify.
So when new issues of a stock hit the market at a cheaper price, basically, than the price paid by the earlier investors in the same stock, then the earlier investors need to be compensated with additional stock so that they're basically their shareholding in the company doesn't get diluted, basically.
All right, it's all clear. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. So other than that, going back to the general terms on preferred stock financing, in addition to the ones that we mentioned, there's a 2-year lockup period for founders and investors alike. Basically, a lockup period means that you can't sell shares in the company without getting an approval from the board and getting a green light from all of the existing investors. And then a final term could be a penalty of at least 1x of the investment upon violation of a material term that's been defined in the agreement. So with that, I may kind of jump into this discussion around equity versus safe seed or pre-seed early stage rounds in CE. So as I mentioned, basically practically like all of the VCs that we know from the region, including Early Bird, Credo Ventures, etc., some of the biggest names of the region, invest in safe rounds when they're outside of Turkey or CE more specifically. And that's why the hottest founders basically go and establish their companies, although they're from the region, in Estonia or the US, so that they can raise their initial funding via a convertible security note or a safe note, so that these local investors don't dictate preferred equity financings. And we see a lot of startups that basically executed these price rounds and have these long shareholders agreements documents and have given out some of these key rights that we've talked about to investors very early on. Some of these key veto rights, for example, an example in point, for example, if the company wants to carry its headquarters from Turkey to the US, since it's now a global company, it's easier to sell to other US clients from as a US headquartered company. Then if say an early stage investor has gotten the right to veto such a transaction, then that may cripple the company and that make it impossible for the company to do that transfer. So it's really important for founders to understand what terms they're signing up for and what will be some of the key terms from a founder's perspective. So as early stage VCs, I'm asking myself, like, why do we all love safe agreements? Because safe agreements are very simple. That allows investors to invest without getting the equity upfront, sets a price, or it gives you very little terms to negotiate on, and there is no need for any legal support or much negotiation at a very early stage. And then I think the main reason that we like safe agreements is that they give a peace of mind and complete freedom to entrepreneurs to run their businesses and make the key decisions. So say, let's go back to that example where an investor has a veto right on a key hire, and this person, the founder, wants to hire a chief of staff that will really transform the company. Then if someone vetoes that hire, then the founder may end up being demotivated, may struggle to find a great person that's going to be able to replace that person. So the company may end up losing 3 months. And in our line of business, 3 months may make or break a company. There has been unicorns that's been created in 1 month or less, like they've been running out of money, and at the end of that 1 month, they made this huge pivot and found their product market fit and went on to become a unicorn. There are like lots of books written about this. So it's, I think, on the early stage, the main key point is to give flexibility to the founder without losing your financial rights as an investor. So of course you will protect your rights. You will get the same class of shares as the investors that will come later down the line, and you will need to be recompensated for the additional risk that you take on by coming on earlier. And that's why a safe sets a discount or a valuation cap, as opposed to converting you at the same valuation as the priced equity round that will happen later down the line. So from yes.
If I may interrupt, I totally understand the functionality of SAFE. Having said that, from your point of view, as a GP at Startup 500, wouldn't it be like, more advantageous just to, push them into a deal earlier on at a lower valuation instead of, waiting for any type of meaningful valuation to materialize if you really believe in that company?
Well,
I mean, just from a pure negotiation standpoint.
Well, actually, like, I feel like you can always set a low valuation with a safe as well. For example, like if you believe in a company, you may do like a $2 million safe and you may take it all by yourself. And then what that will make is that will end up with a much faster transaction, right? And you will be able to get the money to the founder in like a month, as opposed to going through that legal burden of 3 months. So if you believe that the founder can do a lot in those 2 months, then it becomes a very simple decision. And with the side letters that I mentioned, with the additional rights that you can put, like that you can plug into the SAFE agreement, you can basically get the rights that you're looking for. And if you can agree on that, then of course, I'm thinking about the latest investments that we did, and certainly those that were applicable. I would say in only one case, we had to do a priced equity round on pre-seed, and this was a co-investment with another UK fund, which had to do a priced equity round due to their mandate. So in the early stage spectrum, you really, like, if it's the first investment into the company, there's a strong preference of doing a convertible equity deal if you really can't pull it off. And if not, please go for a more simple term sheet and the SPA, which I will go through in a second, the template that we came up with.
Thanks a lot.
So from a founder's perspective, like, or from our perspective, when we think about the governance right at the early stage, so board composition changes over time. Let's start with the board. And unfortunately, in most cases, founders lose the control of the board as the company grows. So it is to a founder's benefit to postpone this as much as possible. So as a very early stage investor, if you end up getting a board seat, then it will be really hard to change that composition later down the line. And you may end up occupying that board seat and may make it harder to wiggle for the founder. So in cases where we think that we can't add really, like, we can't really change the company. So say, like, I'm a second time gaming founder, and I feel like I know the gaming world in and out. And if we're investing in a gaming company, then I may opt for a board seat, because I feel like I will literally provide that value, and I will be there in every meeting. I will give at least like 20% of my time to this company, so that I will support them along them. But if you can't feel that, then let them have those board seats and use them as a negotiation chip, or to bring in new advisors that will be really helpful to the company, as opposed to some financial investor with limited track record in startup ecosystem may end up having these seats. So protected provisions, the veto rights, as I mentioned. So investors might be asking for the affirmative approval on matters around mergers and acquisitions, share transfers, new share issuances, fundraising, opening up a subsidiary. And this may become very burdensome to the company, and this may limit their movements. So requiring an investor's approval for some of these issues may end up crippling the company and create unnecessary bureaucratic burden to some of these founders. Drag along, we see that in some term sheets, basically, as opposed to the tag along, where the investors tag, the minority investors tag to the majority investors selling, some minority investors ask for drag along rights, which is basically the opposite of tag along, which says that even if you're a minority investor, if I decide to sell, I can drag all of the other investors to sell with me at the same price at the same time. So this is basically a no-go for a startup. So you, as a minority investor, cannot ask for a drag along right. But we see unfortunately, some shareholding agreements that have a drag along right for a minority shareholder. So if that conglomerate or something, a holding company decides to exit their investment just to raise some other cash for a company, that will basically sign the death certificate of the startup. That's what it means, basically. So other than that, there may be audit rights, which may be beneficial, but at an early stage, at the first 2 years of the company, it will be an unnecessary burden and a cost for the company, in my opinion. That's why we tend to refrain from getting audit rights. And then, for example, the example that I've talked about, hiring or firing of executives should never be tied to a board approval, in our view again, which will again limit the wiggle room of the founder that needs to take those decisions. So with that, I conclude this one, and I will take you through the simple term sheet that we put together, and I will share that with you as well since it's public. So basically, this is the equity, the priced equity round, the preferred stock financing. So basically touching upon the second section that we talked about, that we use in deals in Turkey and also in CEE to execute very simple share purchase agreements and shareholders agreements. And this is basically the initial documents that you use for agreeing with your counterparty on the key terms of the agreement. And this will be translated into a share purchase agreement, which will be very light compared to other agreements that may ask for a lot of rights, because the rights that we will ask here are, again, very customary and similar to that SAFE. So here, we're setting the pre-money valuation similar to the SAFE, and we're specifying the amount of financing that will be provided by us. And then on this point, the shares, we're making sure, just as the SAFE agreement, if you remember, in its bare bones form, in its simplest form, SAFE only has 3 provisions: a valuation cap, a discount rate, and also finally the provisions guaranteeing that the SAFE investors will get the same class of shares as the later Series A investors. So this shares provision basically makes sure that we will get the preferred shares upon we will get the Class B shares as the SAFE investors in this case. And then closing, these are very customary. So board composition, for example, following the closing, the company's board of directors shall comprise of X board members. This will be decided with the founder depending on their preference. That will be appointed by the founders. So we specifically mentioned in our term sheet that we will have no say in who the founder appoints to the board. And we believe that this gives a lot of flexibility and strength to the founder. So reserved matters are defined next. Reserved matters are basically veto rights, those things that the minority investor can veto, can basically block, and it's given on the Schedule 2. So here you'll see that all of these reserved matters are related to the share classes. So they're trying to protect us from getting another class of shares, basically trying to make sure that if a company emits new class of shares which are more privileged than this one, we will get the same one. So again, this goes back to SAFE spirit of having same class of shares as the investors. And the next one is liquidation preference. This is the this is a very boilerplate term that basically dictates that you will get your money first as the last investor into the company, last in, first out principle. Again, dividend preference, very simple. Down round protection, yes, this is the anti-dilution point that we talked about. Subscription rights, so this says investors shall have pro rata preemptive rights. So this is the pro rata right. Next, we have the lockup period, basically blocking founders and investors from selling shares in the next 2 years in the absence of a written consent of the majority of shareholders. And the rest is, the vesting schedule of the founders, pretty simple. Tag along right, again, we talked about this. We may end up dropping this, but this is something that we try to push for, just to not be stuck in the company if the founder decides to sell, and we want to be able to tag along to him so that he sells our shares in unison to his. So drag along right. So we're not asking for this. We're giving this right to the founder. So we're saying that if the holders of 70% of the total share capital of the company wishes to transfer their entire shareholding to a third person, drag holders shall be entitled to drag all other shareholders on the same terms and conditions. So this is basically a founder-friendly point, which gives the right to the founder holding more than 70% in this specific example to be able to drag along the other shareholders that are in the company. Right of first refusal, again, very boilerplate, simple term. stock option pool. We decide on a basically ESOP stock option pool for the company. This is important because going back to that calculation on safe conversion, this will affect the capitalization amount, the share count amount, basically that we use to calculate price per share. And then we ask for information rights and simple reps and warranties that we basically underline, saying that these will be customary representation and warranties as opposed to very detailed ones. So with that, our term sheet concludes, and it's just a very simple, 4-page term sheet, basically very simple veto rights, and it really carries the spirit of safe documents. And I can really argue that this document is not very different than a safe agreement. And if this was to be translated into a share purchase agreement and an SHA agreement, and let's assume for a second that we're doing this agreement with one party only, with another founder, so there aren't any other parties that may, that may complicate the discussion, then it is very easy to execute this. And with that, I will conclude my presentation. I will share this presentation with you. I will share a glossary of the presentation with you, which includes all of these definitions that I mentioned in this call. And I will also share this term sheet that I went through. Actually, I can paste it on the chat currently. So you can download that term sheet as well, and you can show it to your own legal counsel and use that if you see fit. I think it's a great starting point, and yeah.
Thank you, Kaan. And I see Beji is also here. Welcome.
Thank you.
How are you? Nice to see you.
Nice to see everyone.
And thank you for coming to our meeting. I know it's quite early over there, right?
I'm actually in Brazil, so it's a perfect timing.
Okay, very good.
Oh, it is. Hey, Beji. Thank you so much for joining. I try to let me try to introduce Beji first, and then leave the floor for her to do her own introductions, and then maybe we can open the floor for Q&A. So Beji is one of the global managing directors of 500 Global. So she's one of the captains of the ship, if you will, trying to manage this global domain, these offices that I mentioned and these funds. And she's also taking a leading role in expansion into new emerging economies and geographies under 500 Global, trying to unlock new markets for us. That's why she's always on a plane traveling to Africa, Latin America, Asia. So I know that we have a very diverse crowd of participants currently in this session. So please feel free to ask her about global ecosystems and early stage investing and any other questions that you may have. With that, I may pass the mic to Beji. Again, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. So maybe I can give a little bit of a quick overview on like a little bit of our vision on global and why we decided to act so globally, and then we can then see like direction of the questions you might have. So just to start with one interesting data point, the beginning of this 21st century, of the 100 biggest corporations, 41 was based in Europe. Now it's only 15, right? So sometimes what used to be reference for us for like the largest companies, like the transformation is happening like really rapidly. For instance, when we started investing in 2010, that was when 500 Global started, we had the assumption like, oh, for a company to like start from the very first check on the seed to become a unicorn, our assumption is like it takes at least 10 years, right? Probably like 7 years to build that solid business. And that's already like pretty short sort of timeline. But in our sort of most recent experience, for instance, Cheaper Cash, which is a fintech companies in Africa, it has become a unicorn in like 3 years. So just like transfer a little bit, like I know we used to think, oh, it's going to take us 50 years, it's going to take us 20 years, it's going to take us 7 years. Now we're looking at the speed of 3 years for so much value being created at a global level. When we started investing, I think in 2010, most people thought about in Silicon Valley, that's where we started, thought like, oh, like the biggest market is going to be China and India. And then you have something called like the rest of the world that we'll see, we'll check it out. And I know like I have a Brazilian background. I look very Chinese. I am born, I'm actually based in, like I'm working sort of remotely right now in Brazil. I knew at the time that the investment and venture will rise in like the rest of the world, right? So when I joined the organization, it was one of the very few that thought international would be relevant. And I'm really happy like the fund and we also like make that assumption and bet, because just gonna go through like some of our fund component. I think the most amazing part of like building this global organization first is to have a really good like local team. I don't think we can go to true global operation without having this very deep understanding of what's happening at the local level, right? So we're very lucky, first of course, to have like the fund like the Istanbul now, like really looking at the Eastern Europe for us. But just like what we've done with the fund here with Istanbul, we have done that for Southeast Asia, we have done that with Latin America, and most recently I'm like very active in the Middle East and looking into Africa. So I think the first very important sort of component is this hyper local context that we build in that adds to the global platform. And the second part, sometimes when you look at success, it's so much easier when you look, oh, of course that was successful. So our best performing company from the first fund were 2 founders from Portugal, like unlikely location to find really successful founders. Our second fund, one of like people know a lot about Canva, founders from Australia. Also probably like if we have to guess, it wouldn't be what we would guess. And then fast forward on all of our funds, like the most recent global fund we have, the fastest growing company is in Africa. So I think that just maybe set the context. We try to invest when before people invest. And then the secret sauce of the success is having hyper local team members that we really share as a global partnership, because I don't think there's like a top-down approach. It's really a bottom-up that adds to the whole. So I think that's maybe just to set the context, but we can talk about any specific market or how 500 think about global expansion or anything specific to any investments topic that you might have.
Thank you, Beji. Are there any questions that you want to raise? Or I have one. Onur? We don't hear, I don't hear your voice.
Thank you very much for the abundant information you have shared, Kaan, and very nice to meet with you, Beji. My question is, have you ever done a handshake deal in our region without seeing the term sheet? I'm sure that would happen in the US, but in our region, things seem to move a little bit slow, and I sometimes come up with startup founders that carry a certain hype. But I'm wondering, in the numbers you deal with, does that ever happen in Turkey or regions around us?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. Sometimes it seems easy to invest globally, but I like remember very vividly one of the first deal we did in Southeast Asia, because like once you do something 100 times, you can streamline that, how to do that 100 times, right? But I remember seeing the bill from our legal counsel. The investment was $50,000. The legal bill was $50,000. And the handshake was done before that $50,000 just from the legal part came in. So I think when we're like going into like new markets, there is a high cost very often at the very first beginning, the first time you're doing the deal. But I think there's a lot of learning and efficiency that we've learned throughout time. So that's why we also create our standardized docs, and we try to share as much as possible anything that we learn on, whether it's cap table, legal terms, because I think the more structure we can put in, and I don't think it's one size fits all. Something that works in Silicon Valley, it's very, very different from like what's needed in like Turkey, which is very different from what's needed in Brazil or Malaysia. So there's a lot of local learning that we have. I do think there's one thing that we put in our design principle is we want to be the best partner a founder can find. So we work alongside with them to find ways. So we do handshakes very often before, especially when we started. Now that we like done 50 investments, I hope we don't do the same type of like length and mistakes that we used to do. But I think answering your question is anything we're doing new investment at the beginning is really hard, and then it gets easier. I know the hardest deal normally has been in Europe because of the structure in Europe, and I think sometimes with all the timing, we also like lost deals because of that historically. But we try not to, I think for us to be competitive long term, I think for all the angel investors to be competitive long term is to be the best partner a founder can have. And then there's a lot of learnings and the partnership that we have together. But definitely the $50,000 deal from the legal firm wasn't like a super pleasant surprise, but that also helped us be better.
Thank you.
Thank you, Beji. And any other questions? I have a question. Now, before you came, we had 3 sessions and we learned how to, deal flow, where to find best deals and how to pick the best deals and how to do the term sheets. And wherever we listen of these how-to things in the investment, it is like the fairy tale, and then the couple lived happily ever after. But what happens when the Cinderella have the bumpy roads, and what those bumpy roads includes after this marriage, and how do you deal with those, and what are some tricks over there?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. I think when we're investing in innovation, if you have the assumption like every deal is gonna be successful and every deal is gonna be perfect, please don't do it, because I can guarantee it's not gonna be the case. So I think one component around investing early stage and one component about thinking about innovation is the mindset of how comfortable you are with uncertainty and how comfortable you are with the risk and failure. So for 500, for us, we don't need every single deal to be successful. We need a percentage to be wildly successful, right? Whether it's like that 1% that's going to be at the unicorn status or the 5% that's going to be in the 100 millions. But I think first of all, when you are investing, we're thinking about investing. I know we talk a lot about like the mechanics of investing itself, but the thesis that of type of investment, innovation, and the failure risk and the model of your investment is very important. Because if you come in with a mindset, which we did, like we didn't think that all the international deals would be successful. We just need to have some within our portfolio. So I think one key component is to build out that very important investment thesis. And then you have I think the mechanics just help you be better investor, right? Cap table, terms, and all of it. I think that's almost like the table stake that you need to ensure you are in the market. And I think answering your question on like after investing the ups and downs, very often you might be investing in a first-time entrepreneur, which we also do a lot. I don't think very often they have the question or the answer to how to build that market. I think an important component in this journey, I mentioned a little bit before, is how do you I think sometimes we want to generate too much value, right? Like even with 500, like we've been talking a lot about like what's the true value add. Like okay, we have capital. We definitely feel like community is an important component that we can add. Like giving growth, like introducing customer, it's also like an important piece. So I think as you come into the journey with the entrepreneurs, also I think it's important to try to understand, are there things that you can try to be of value add in this journey that you're gonna go in. And I think a key component of it is communication, right? I think it sounds like a little bit of a basic piece. I think it's not only on the investor side, we also think that's what we also do with the founders, especially if they have the chance to come into our acceleration program, because then we're a little more proactive working with them. We also try to like build a habit of like giving more reports. I think it's really annoying when the founders, when they need help or when they want to raise their next round, they call you, right? So we try to create a little bit of a habit of also like give us like constant update, like because then we know like there's no crazy surprises of, oh, you need an instant acquisition, you're running normally 99% of the time, I'm running out of cash, I need like additional capital. So I think a little bit of the tip is creating the cadence and with entrepreneurs for a constant communication as they're building the business.
Thank you. I'm looking if there are any other questions. If not, I'm gonna
Maybe
ask.
I can.
Yes, may I
Yeah,
have a
please.
question?
Yes, please, Leo, go ahead.
Hello, Betty. I'm also in Brazil. We're at the same time here. I want to know how do you see as an investor, like in developing countries and Africa and Brazil? Lately, we can see like very common bigger rounds for seed investors, like the venture funds are investing like big rounds of like $8-10 million in more experienced entrepreneurs. And it's a very different kind of investment from investing for a first-time entrepreneur with a good idea. And normally this happens because those are businesses that need more money to start, as fintech businesses and so on. And we can see that those businesses are scaling up very fast. Like these are the kind of businesses we see here in Brazil that becomes a unicorn in 2-3 years, at most 5 years. And how do you guys see this kind of investment, since it takes like a bigger share of your funds? And how do you have some special team to deal with this kind of entrepreneurs, and how do you work with it?
Okay, that's an interesting question. I don't know how much you cover or will cover, or you wonder about like, what is the valuation of a startup? And very often the secret sauce of the valuation of the startup is how much money do they need? And then they shouldn't dilute between 10 and 30%. So those startup maybe at a similar stage, but if they need 5 million to start, they can't dilute that much. So it needs to be at least 20 to 30 million valuation versus a company that needs 500,000 to start. Like their valuation could be like 2-3 million, for instance, right? They are in different sectors. There are, of course, a lot of investment framework you add on, but as you wonder what's the valuation of a company in the early stage, most of the time it's how much money the company needs, and you don't dilute too much to keep the ownership on stage financing. I think generally speaking, a very efficient startup, of course, it's region by region, they can get very early market assumption fit. If they're very, very efficient, they can get it done with 1 million funding. When they're a little bit less efficient, probably 3 million, up to 5 million, depending on the sector they are in. So sometimes when you look at a company, they're like, oh my God, like they have a huge valuation and unicorn and all of it and the high growth. Claire, you're mentioning, it's also on the byproduct of like how much capital they need, the burn of the capital, you calculate the market size with it. Within 500, we used to want to invest in companies that are a little more capital efficient because there weren't in a lot of frontier markets that you were asking that they're follow-on capital. Because let's say I can only put in 100K, but the companies needs like 5 million. My 100K is not going to do anything, and they're going to use that money in like a month, and then they run out of money. They can build that 12 to 18 months runway to do it, right? But I think today, especially I think for like Southeast Asia, Latin America, you see a lot of downstream capital coming in. So you would see, for instance, like a SoftBank doing like 100 million together in the deal. So that give us a lot more comfort. Like if we're investing, we know like other downstream capital is coming in. It's not that we're only following what other people were doing. I think it's a matter of trying to understand between the company starting all the way to their exit, how much capital availability there is in their stage financing. So I think maybe if you asked me 8 years ago, and you were saying like Brazil can take to like other market, we didn't have that many like Series A, Series B, C, D investments, but now in Brazil we have it, right? So today I'm a lot more comfortable in coming in a deal that is at 5 million because I know there's downstream capital sort of coming in. Am I super comfortable doing that in Africa that it's not in fintech? Less so, because I don't think that the stage financing on follow-on capital is that available. Would it be in 3 years? I think it will, but I think it's finding that very subtle balance as we do investing. So it's a little bit like how much capital the startup need, they don't run out of money, and you push a little bit forward if you're interested in that space. So it's a little bit of an art, if you will, with the science being, okay, what's the science evaluation? How much money they need? No more than 30% dilution.
Okay, thank you very much, Betty.
Thank you. And any other question? Okay, if not, I have another question. How do you include the ESG priorities, ESG principles in the existing companies? Because I assume if you did, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, an investment, and now ESG is your priority, you should, what do you do with those companies? And with the new investments, how do you involve the ESG principles to the new investments? And I'm seeing that many ESG principles are important for almost everybody, but is not a priority for a startup because they have to be fast. They are, doing lots of things to, time is limited for them. So how do you force them to make ESG their priority in the early stages?
Yeah. So maybe a little bit of context to set for everyone. It's environmental, social, and corporate governance. And I think on the ESG side, a lot of people, especially in later stage, think of it as a risk mitigation, right? And I think the challenge of that framework of thinking amidst the risk mitigation is like you might sort of either wait a little bit longer, or maybe it's not that risky in the early stage, and you delay, and what is the sort of right balance to do it? I think very often with ESG or other sort of impact approach, I think it has to start with like the theory of change, right? Like I think there's not like right or wrong. I think it's a bit of making the leap. Overall, at least that's a very sort of personal approach. I think it matters less of where you are. It's more like, are you making improvement, right? So for instance, like just most recently, I know that's not what you asked, we were talking about portfolio. And then the metric that matters for portfolio could be like, what's NPS score? Like how much would you recommend 500 as a fund, right? So I don't mind whether it is 10 or minus 20, like I don't mind what it is. I think as long as we're improving, I think that's the most important piece in terms of how we can approach ESG. I think that's one principle is, can we improve 10% every time we measure? The second part is, if you start really low, then it's really hard to catch up. So let's say for the startup, they start a business, and then let's say part of the ESG, it's like building diversity. So if their first 10 employees have 0 women in their like diversity on the gender side, they have to, if they ever have to move to 50%, their catch up, like they're in like very deep debt. So I think ideally you try to create like not that deep of a debt to catch up if you can, right? So answering your question is like, for the portfolio, the most important part is like, let's just start measuring. I don't think there's a right way to do it, especially in venture, right? I think our legal team, we talk a lot about legal, they push back, it's like, oh, that's not technically ESG, but like what it is at the early stage with venture, right? So I think the most important part is like theory of change. We believe this should be part of 500 principle. And then with the portfolio, let's try to say where the baseline is, and let's try to improve upon whatever baseline we have. And then with the new investment, we make the commitment with our investors. So for instance, I most recently raised our fund for the Middle East. Our LPs didn't ask for it, but I suggest to say, let's add the ESG to the fund, so that when we do the questionnaire, the founders are already thinking, okay, if the investor is asking, that's probably important. So should I also consider when I'm applying? So I think you just like try to create a little bit of a movement there. But there are a lot of challenges. It's not like straightforward. So I remember when I was like applying the ESG framework for the questionnaire, there are questions on diversity around like indigenous. I don't even know how to apply indigenous in like that's I think that's a very maybe like America's concept, right? Of like indigenous. I would know how to apply in Brazil. I would know how to apply in the US, but I have no idea how to do that like in the MENA region in an equivalent way. So
In
I
Turkey
think
also, it is very tough. Everybody is
difficult, right? So I think it's just like, oh, maybe there's a very like clear definition and people get super attached to a certain definition. I think it's just like, for anything on the impact side, it's for us to make the commitment. On that commitment, start measuring, and then trying to improve and commit to our investors, commit to our portfolio, that we want to like move towards that direction.
Yes. So is it a no-go if the person says, oh, I cannot deal with these things? Well,
No, it's not a defining, like if there's no diversity like in the team, like we would not invest in it. But I think there's a little bit of a beauty of 500, which is like sometimes we can bring companies into the acceleration program. And when you're accelerating them, you can really influence them on like the growth mindset, on building more diversity. So there's a lot of things, especially being the first check. I think for a lot of angels, for a lot of first check, you are their first check. So you also can help them shape the culture. So I feel like I'd rather not wait. I'd rather like do it now so you're not in debt or very deep debt where you're just like some debt and then you try to catch up after, right?
yes. Thank you very much. Okay. Is there any other questions? Or 3, 2, 1, close. I'm thanking Peggy and also Kaan. Is there anything you want to add, Kaan?
No, thank you so much. Thank you, Beji, for joining, and thank you everyone for participating in the discussion and with your lovely questions.
And before leaving, to everyone, we have advertisement for the next session.
Yes, so I mistakenly said that this was the last session. I mean, this is the last session in that we provide these presentations, but the next one will be sort of like this very light case study composition where we will give you 3 blind startups and ask you to basically produce a scorecard, and then we'll rank those scorecards based on actual outcomes. So the blind startups will be actual startups that's at a later stage, but we will, present them in such a way that it'll be they will be early stage, blind anonymous startups that you will pick and produce a scorecard. I will share the scorecard beforehand that you will fill out, and we'll give you some materials on the companies. And on Wednesday, we plan to do that if we can somehow garner the interest for the closing competition, if you will. So with that, I can pass the mic to Neşe Hanım and ask Beji, thank you so much for joining.
Beji,
See you.
See you.
And then we may do like a hand raise, or we may like write in the chat maybe to basically gauge the interest level.
Yeah, to do the planning more precise, we need approximately to know how many people will be joining. So if we can see some hands or hearts or whatever, if you are gonna join on Wednesday, because depending on the crowds, we will do, rooms or one group. So I saw 3, 4, and the others are sleeping. Yeah. Okay, so it seems, I think probably at least half of these people will be coming. But we will also ask by email, right? Gökçe, I'm looking at you, to the others, if they will be joining. But I understand that we will be maybe around 20 people, Kaan.
All right.
So we'll do a breakout rooms planning.
All right. Thank you so
much.
much.
It'll be a fun little competition, and see who will be the best investor among us.
I mean, it will entail some sort of luck, as in everything with early stage investing. You can, somehow isolate that luck component by building a portfolio and screening, thousands of deals, in my opinion. But with one and done competitions, there will always be an element of luck, in my opinion.
So we will see who is the luckiest also.
Exactly.
Okay, and thank you very much. And before closing, since there are many grants all over the world here, 2 issues of, this ESG composition, ESG principles to be applied in startups, and what we say harvesting period, the after marriage, what happens? I think the 2 subjects that we didn't cover in this series. Maybe other committees, or maybe next year we can cover this, Gökçe, in our committee. But if other committees also want to cover this, we will be happy to join and learn more about these things also. And if there anything, Mehmet, are you raising hand, or are you?
No, I'm not raising my hand. It is just, count me in for Thursday's session.
Wednesday.
I can add something, Neşe.
Yes.
If you can hear me very well. We would like to collaborate with the other entrepreneurship chapters among the other FBN chapters. If you wanna launch entrepreneurship committee, we are happy to share all our experiences with you guys. We happy to hear that new chapters open in the different countries, and it's always nice to learn together. But this time on Wednesday, time for compete. Let's see what will we do together. Yeah, it's really exciting for us as well. Thank you so much, Neşe and Kaan, for this session.
Okay, so thank you so much, Kaan and Gökçe and everybody for joining, and see you on Wednesday.
Thank you very much.
Everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Bye.
Bye-bye.